I think the Russians need to know that there are a lot of us who fully understand what happened in 2016, and it really better not happen again in 2018.
Welcome back to AM Joy. After Donald Trump's fiasco in Helsinki, Republicans found themselves in a now familiar position, visibly uncomfortable with what the leader of their party was doing, quietly critical, including on background to reporters, but struggling to be anything other than publicly submissive for fear of upsetting the diehard Trump voter base. You just heard Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell trying to talk tough by warning Russia not to interfere in our elections this year. Let's take a step back to 2016 and recall that it was McConnell whom Vice President Joe Biden and others blame for undercutting the Obama administration's response to Russian interference in the 2016 election by refusing to sign on to a bipartisan statement condemning the interference and reportedly watering down a letter from congressional leaders urging states to help protect the election. McConnell, of course, denies that he did anything to hamper President Obama's response, and he joined other Republicans in rebuking Trump for his submissive performance in Helsinki.
It feels like the dam is breaking, and that, people are, I was really glad to see people on both sides of the aisle condemning what happened yesterday strongly.
So there was lots of damage done yesterday because the U.S. decided to walk away from an affirmation of U.S. values.
I think it was a bad day for the president. I think he can fix it. I think he needs to fix it.
I never thought I'd see an American president throw the intelligence community under the bus like that.
But even that day of gentle criticism didn't last very long, with Republicans racing to latch on to Trump's incredible claim that he misspoke at that press conference by confusing the words would and wouldn't.
I think it's a big step forward when anybody in public life or anybody in private life admits they've made a mistake. It's good to confess it and say you're sorry.
I think, people understand that it was a painful experience for him, and look, I think that's a positive step.
I'm just glad he clarified it. I can't read his intentions or what he meant to say at the time.
So right on cue, McConnell and fellow Republicans are giving Trump a get out of Helsinki free card. So will they do anything at all to defend American voters against a potential Russian attack on the next election? Joining me now, Republican political consultant Shermichael Singleton, Kimberly Atkins of the Boston Herald, and Rick Wilson, author of Everything Trump Touches Dies, a Republican strategist gets real about the worst president ever. A subtle title in which you went for the sort of low burn. You didn't want to be too ostentatious with it, Rick. And so I guess I'll start with you, Rick, since I've promoted your book. Mitch McConnell trying to come out and talk tough against the Russians comes amid the fact that we have all of this reporting. We have the Politico article from January in which Joe Biden said that Majority Leader Mitch McConnell stopped the Obama administration from speaking about Russian interference in the 2016 campaign, refused to sign onto a bipartisan statement of condemnation. Biden said he and former President Obama worried that without a united front speaking before the election, it would play into the Russians' large ambitions. Another piece of reporting. Former Obama Chief of Staff Dennis McDonough saying point blank that Mitch McConnell watered down even a bipartisan response, trying to tell secretaries of state to protect themselves. Let's play that.
The president asked the four leaders in a bipartisan meeting in the Oval Office to join him in asking the states to work with us on this question. It took over 3 weeks to get that statement worked out. It was dramatically watered down. You can ask Harry Reid and Nancy Pelosi, even the speaker.
And it was watered down on the insistence of Mitch McConnell?
Yes.
And nobody else?
Yes.
Okay, and third little point of interest here, an April 2017 article saying the CIA, which I was just been reading over and over again this morning, had evidence of Russian efforts to help Donald Trump, specifically to help Donald Trump, even though the FBI disagreed that it was specifically for Trump. The CIA believed it was, and Senator Mitch McConnell of Kentucky, when he was briefed with the Gang of Eight, the Republican Majority Leader resisted, questioning the underpinnings of the intelligence, according to officials with knowledge of the discussions. Mr. McConnell ultimately agreed to a softer version of this letter, which did not mention the Russians, but warned of unnamed malefactors who might seem to disrupt the elections. Rick, how can Mr. McConnell have any credibility on Russia given all of that?
I think I think Mitch McConnell probably regrets those decisions at this point because the scope of what Russia has done and it's continuing to do to our country is becoming clearer by the minute. And I'm going to give him a small squish of doubt to say that, this is an area where he thought it might have been political, and he thought it might have had something, that wasn't on the up and up, and he wanted to ask the questions. However, anyone who really dove into that intelligence then or now recognizes the scope of this. On the plus side for Mitch McConnell, he has not done what Paul Ryan has done. And Paul Ryan has allowed Devin Nunes and this clown caucus in the House to weaponize the investigations into the FBI as a part of Trump's legal defense team. Mitch McConnell's kept his hands off the intel process in the Senate, which has produced one of the more significant and substantive analyses of Russia's influence in 2016. But I will say this. Everyone now knows the score. No one gets a pass going forward. No one gets a pass in the last 6 months because the intel community has made it incredibly clear. Every single part of the intel community is in 100% agreement that the Russians did this. The Russians wanted this for Donald Trump's benefit. And going forward, the Russians are continuing to put their thumb on the scale of American politics. Nobody gets a pass from here. No one gets to say, well, there's something questionable about it, or one person in one agency has a dissenting view. This is categorical. This is absolutely night and day. And Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan both need to behave that way going forward.
Yeah, and you've even had Will Hurd, a Republican from a safe district in Texas, come out and do an op-ed. He's a former CIA agent saying Trump is being manipulated by Vladimir Putin. What should we do? So this is a stalwart Republican coming out and saying that. And yet, Kimberly, to Rick's point, you do see a difference between the way the Senate Intelligence Committee and the House Intelligence Committee are handling this now knowledge that everyone should share that Russians interfered. But do you see, just in your reporting, any desire on the part of Senate Republicans to act proactively to defend the next election against Russian intrusion? We haven't seen efforts to protect Robert Mueller. We certainly don't see them wanting to do that. But are they still looking at this through a political lens of protect Donald Trump more than protect the election?
Yeah, the short answer to that is no. There has been really no appetite on the part of Republicans in either chamber of Congress, frankly, to put more efforts into protecting the election systems, giving states more money, investing into cyber protections. We haven't seen any of that, and that's something that all it takes is the word from Mitch McConnell or Paul Ryan to send bills like that to the floor that could pass with an overwhelming veto-proof majority if they wanted to do that, as well as protect the Mueller investigation. I think what's protecting the president right now and his ability, despite the fact that Republicans are sometimes uncomfortable with what he does and says, like the Helsinki summit, are polls. The president knows that Republicans overwhelmingly are on his side, and that means that Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan and other Republican leaders in Congress are not going to act in ways that are against him. They're not going to put in place policies that he doesn't want, such as a bill to protect the Mueller investigation or to boost election protections. Yeah, they passed a condemnation. The Senate passed a condemnation of his behavior in Helsinki, or of this proposal that Vladimir Putin had to hand over Americans and also have essentially outsourced part of the Mueller investigation to Moscow, which was ridiculous on its face. But that's non-binding. It doesn't really do anything other than sort of shake a finger at the president. That seems to be as far as they're going to go because they don't want to lose the support that the president has overall from the party.
That doesn't speak well, for the party itself. That the more important thing is the polls. But to the point that you just made, Kimberly, here is the Axios latest poll that says approve or disapprove of how Trump handled his press conference in Helsinki. Overall disapproval is 58%, but Republicans only 18% disapprove, 79% even think he did a great job there, which is opposed to every other group of Americans, including independents. And let's play Rand Paul, Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky, and then I'll come to you on this, Shermichael, actually saying, doesn't matter, even if the Russians did it.
But we also have to understand that we have to deal with the world as it is, not as we wish it to be. And if we're only going to talk to people who have perfect constitutional republics, we're going to have a very small audience, and we're going to have a lot of potential conflict with no outlet for diplomacy. So, no, I think the president did a good thing by meeting with Putin, and I think it's a mistake for people to try to turn this into a partisan escapade.
Shermichael, you're a Republican strategist. Explain to our audience who are just gobsmacked that that a third of our country thinks that meeting went well in Helsinki and that it isn't a big deal if Russians interfered in the election.
Well, right. I mean, I think a lot of conservatives, at least individuals who voted for the president, you have heard this message or this line time and time again that, yeah, he made a mistake here, but look at what we're getting, right? I mean, earlier you were talking about evangelicals. Why do they continue to stick with the president? Because they got one Supreme Court justice. They're likely going to get another. So individuals are looking at tangible things that sort of benefit them individually over the overall country, and they're saying, well, I am getting this, or we are getting this, so I'm going to stick with him regardless. Look, Joy, I never imagined that the Russians would have an asset in the president. They've always had spies, et cetera, in our country. But just imagine having the president of the United States of America essentially throw our country under the bus. That's unprecedented. And Republicans in Congress, the House and the Senate, are only concerned about self-preservation because, again, to that poll from Axios, they're looking at the numbers and they see that a majority of the Republican base are sticking with the president. So because they're concerned about their seats and all the stature that comes with it, they're not willing to speak out aggressively enough. And I can only tell you, Joy, I think we're going to feel that burn come midterms and beyond.
Rick, you know, Paul Waldman has a piece in the Washington Post in which he says the entire Republican Party is now becoming a Russian asset. A clip from it. It may be because they've convinced themselves that no tactic is too repugnant, no alliance too distasteful, and no moral compromise too loathsome when you're serving the lofty goal of keeping Democrats from power. Or it may be that they're terrified that their rabid base will decide that they're insufficiently devoted to the cult of Trump. Whatever the reasons, they've traveled a long way down this road already, and it doesn't look like they're turning back. Do you agree with Paul Waldman?
This is the greatest intelligence coup in history, Joy. The Russians have compromised an American president thoroughly, completely, and evidently, and they have thoroughly compromised the Republican Party and the Congress that should be a constitutional check and balance on him, a co-equal branch of government. The Russians didn't have to go and set something up to lure Congress in. They just knew that once Trump was in, his celebrity and his cult would be the enforcers for them. So I think Paul's generally right that the president is utterly compromised, and the Congress, you know, look, I don't think Congress is the majority of them. Maybe Dana Rohrabacher and a couple of others are swinging around with Russians, but I think most of them are just so terrified. The ones I speak to all the time, including a lot of these guys that go out on TV with the red hat on and say Trump's the best, you know, they call and they're like, oh my God, this is a disaster. We're being dragged down to serve Vladimir Putin. I mean, the NATO summit shook so many members of the Senate and the House. You thought they had already hit bottom, and then he went into Helsinki and went into this you know, GIMP act with Putin, and you know, they're shocked, they're stunned, but they're terrified of the base. They are terrified that these guys, you know, the minute you say something wrong about Donald Trump, their Facebook feeds and their phones blow up, and it's death threats, and it's this craziness from the Trump right that won't quit, and they are intimidated by it. They're not leaders anymore. They're a cleanup crew.
And then, Kimberly, I wonder if they are also concerned about Russia, because, you know, this New York Times story, this is from April of 2017, but I've been rereading it this morning. It makes it very clear that the CIA was very clear in their assessment that not only did Russians infiltrate the DNC and the DCCC, but that they also did infiltrate Russian systems, states that were controlled by the Republican Party, their election systems, but also the RNC. Are Republicans on the Hill not concerned that at a certain point, if they don't behave themselves exactly as the Russians want, that maybe information on them will come out?
You know, I think in the past, I heard a lot more from Republicans with respect to Russian interference. Thereby, the grace of God go us. You know, this time they tried to help one side, another time they will try to help another side, and that our election systems have to be protected. I think this has become overshadowed as we get closer to the midterms about a desire to stay on point with the president, not to push back against him too hard, not to upset the base, and so it has not been that kind of response. And what I hear more often from Republicans now is, oh, well, I wish the president would focus on the economy. Oh, well, I wish the president would focus on immigration. They're thinking a lot more about the midterm election messaging than the fact that this was an attack on election systems of the United States that could go either way.
Yeah, and Michael, then I wonder if when you're speaking with your fellow Republicans, what happens if Dan Coates is right and we have a digital 9/11? What if their next attack is not on our election system? What if it's on the grid? What if it's on a bank? What if it's on Wall Street? What will Republicans do then?
Well, look, Joy, I think Republicans will ultimately be responsible if such an act occurs, because they have done much of nothing. Look, I think the Republican Party, at least the Republican Party as we once knew it, is dead. This is now the party of Trump. The conservative philosopher Edmund Burke once wrote, "We must reform in order to conserve," and I think it's long overdue for the Republican Party to truly check the President of the United States. That is why we have a separation of branches. There's a dereliction of duty here. And I'm a Republican. I've always been one. But I think come November, the American people have to send a message to the Republican Party and Donald Trump.
Meaning, and a message that, what message? Are you saying
message
they should
that
vote
we're
for
not
Democrats?
taking this anymore.
Yeah. All right. Well, Sir Michael Singleton, Kimberly Atkins, Rick Wilson, thank you all very much. Really appreciate you being here this morning.
Thanks, Joy.
Thank you. And up next, The Art of the Deal co-author Tony Schwartz decodes the Trump-Helsinki debacle. Stay with us. Hey, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down there for more AM Joy and the rest of MSNBC. And click on any of the videos right here to watch the latest interviews and highlights. And you can get more videos from MSNBC for free every day with our newsletters. Just visit msnbc.com/newsletters to sign up now.